You know, you're not eating a cupcake for my birthday?
I'll get one before I leave.
Oh, rude not to, really.
Okay, we're on live, and this is Ezra. This is Ezra and Nehemiah, lesson 4. So, I forgot to ask before we started if anybody has any prayer requests. Y'all can be thinking about that, and we'll share those at the end. But let's start with prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this beautiful, glorious day. Thank you for the warm sunshine, Lord. Thank you for a day without rain. Thank you for Lainey, and we just praise you for creating her, Father. And we pray that you would bless her in her 17th year and all the rest of the years of her life, Lord. And Lord, I just thank you for each of the young people who are here and the homes that they represent. And I pray, Father, that you would be our teacher tonight and you would open our eyes and our ears and our hearts to what you have to say. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we are in Ezra chapter 5, and we're going to do chapters 5 and 6 tonight. And I'm going to give you a little preview right now of what the next few weeks are going to look like. So we're going to finish 5 and 6 tonight, and that will be the close. If you remember in the kind of the system that I'm teaching you of how to study the Bible, we're studying it section by section of our outline. And tonight will be the end of one of those sections. And then next week, we will do chapters 7 and 8, which are a section by themselves. So you already know what your homework is for next week. Your homework for next week is chapters 7 and 8 of Ezra. And then the next week, 2 weeks from tonight, we will take a break from Ezra and Nehemiah because we're having a out-of-school party. Yay! So we'll have food and a time of fellowship, and that will be the Wednesday before Bible school starts. So I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to do some service by working on Bible school stuff. And I hope all of you have signed up to help with Bible school. And then the next week will be Bible school. And then the next week we'll be back to Ezra. Okay? So that's what's coming for like the next month. All right. Let's look at Ezra chapter 5. And I'm going to read part of this to us. Now the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, arose and began to rebuild the house of God that is in Jerusalem. And the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. At the same time, Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Shethar-Bozenai and their associates came to them and spoke to them thus: Who gave you a decree to build this house and to finish this structure? They also asked them this: What are the names of the men who are building this building? But the eye of their God was on the elders of the Jews, and they did not stop them until the report should reach Darius, and then an answer be returned by letter concerning it. So let's stop right there. If we just refresh our brains to where we are in this story, Zerubbabel is our leader, and what does he want to rebuild? The temple, right. So he's rebuilding the temple, and when we stopped at the end of last week, how much of it did they have built?
Well, it kind of depends, because we read some last week that they had finished it.
Right, but not that aside. In the actual timeline, what do we have built?
The altar.
Plus, the altar was the very first thing they built. What did they build? And then they had the huge celebration.
The wall.
Not the wall.
Foundation.
The foundation, right? So the whole foundation of the temple is built. And remember, that's when they had the celebration where some people were shouting and some people were crying, right? And so now we're continuing right along, and you should recognize the name of these two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. Why should you recognize their names?
Because they have books in the Bible.
Because they have books in the Bible. That's right. So these prophets are actually, you can go read the things that they prophesied in their books of the Bible. And we don't have our timeline. Our timeline's printed inside. But if you remember, this is... I'm sure you wouldn't remember. I wouldn't remember. The time that we're talking about now is approximately 521 BC. And there's a new king. And who is the new king that I just read about?
Darius.
Darius, right. So Zerubbabel started in like 538, and now we're to 521. So one of you who's good at math, how many years has it been?
17.
Okay, so about 17 years have passed since Zerubbabel came and they built the altar and they got the foundation built. And now it says that Haggai and Zechariah began to prophesy to these people. And what did Zerubbabel and Jeshua start doing?
Building the house of God.
They started building the house of God. That's exactly right. Let's read the rest of this chapter, and then I want to hear what you underlined or circled or had questions about in this chapter before I share with you some of the things that I had. If you haven't had a chance to do that, then as we're reading is a great opportunity for you to do that. This is a copy, I'm beginning in verse 6. This is a copy of the letter that Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Shethar-Bozenai and his associates, the governors who were in the province beyond the river, sent to Darius the king. They sent him a report in which was written as follows: To Darius the king, all peace. Be it known to the king that we went to the province of Judah, to the house of the great God. It is being built with huge stones, and timber is laid in the walls. The work goes on diligently and prospers in their hands. Then we asked those elders and spoke to them thus: Who gave you a decree to build this house and to finish this structure? We also asked them their names for your information, that we might write down the names of their leaders. And this was their reply to us: We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and we are rebuilding the house that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and finished. But because our fathers had angered the God of heaven, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried away the people to Babylonia. However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, Cyrus the king made a decree that this house of God should be rebuilt. And the gold and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple that was in Jerusalem and brought into the temple of Babylon, these Cyrus the king took out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered to one whose name was Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor. And he said to him, Take these vessels, go and put them in the temple that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be rebuilt on its site. Then this Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God that is in Jerusalem, and from that time until now it has been in building, and it is not yet finished. Therefore, if it seems good to the king, let search be made in the royal archives there in Babylon to see whether a decree was issued by Cyrus the king for the rebuilding of this house of God in Jerusalem, and let the king send us his pleasure in this matter. Okay, so we're going to stop there. That's the end of chapter 5. So what happens in this chapter?
Well, the people are building, and these other people come and ask them who they are and why they're doing this, and who told them they could do this, and they basically tell them the story that we've been reading, just in a more condensed version.
Okay, that's exactly right. And remember, whose land are we talking about here?
Persia's?
This is Persia's land. All that is in our story is the kingdom of Persia, okay? And these exiles have been allowed to go there and live and to rebuild the temple, but they're still subjects of Persia, right? Their king is still the Persian king, so Darius is their king. And that's true of this Tattenai as well. He's a governor of the province beyond the river. Anybody got an idea? Maybe there's a geography buff here. What river is it that beyond the river refers to? Anybody know?
The Jordan.
No, that's a great guess, but that's not it. It's not the Nile, but what's the other great river in this region?
The Persian River.
No.
The river of Persia.
Starts with an E.
Nebuchadnezzar's river.
Anybody?
If you give me a second, I'll keep.
EU. What?
I think I'm wrong.
No, say it.
It's okay.
What is it? What's the name of the river?
The European River.
No.
Is he wronger than Nebuchadnezzar's river?
Euphrates River. That's right. This is the Euphrates River. And so these are people who live beyond the Euphrates. And they come into Jerusalem. And what do you think they might think when they see this temple being built?
That the Israelites are trying to revolt.
Why might they think that?
Because they're building like their main building back in their city and their walls.
Yeah, so think about, because we're probably more familiar with our own country's history. Think about like the days when the United States was being settled. If a ambassador from America, from the American colonies or something, went out to a Western territory that they had claimed, and the Indians were putting together this very large, very strong structure, what do you think those people would go back and say?
The Indians are building a giant fort. We gotta go take them out.
They're building a fort, right? So that's probably what this gentleman thought. He thought these Israelites have come down here, they've been sent and nobody knows what's going on. Because remember, there's no FaceTime, there's no CNN, there's no Fox News, there's no MSNBC. Nobody's giving the news. We're talking about if you want to send a message, you've got to handwrite a letter and then you've got to give it to a carrier. And that carrier has to physically carry it back to wherever the message goes. So the news travels very slowly. And what this gentleman sees, he's a governor, he's a probably just like Zerubbabel. He is a native person whose people were taken exile, and now he's been sent back to an area, and he is the official governor who represents the Persian Empire in that area, right? And he comes in and he sees that they are building this very strong looking structure. And what are the two things that our Bible points out that were part of this very strong structure?
A wall. Is that?
No. Give somebody else a chance. I love your participation, but pause for just a minute. Let somebody else have a chance. What are two things that they point out specifically that are part of this structure? Look at verse 8.
Huge stones.
Huge stones is one thing.
Timbers.
And what?
Timbers.
Timbers, right? It's not like 2x4s. We're talking about whole tree trunks here. This is a very strong structure that these people are building. And how is the work described? Diligently. And how's it going?
Really fast.
It's going fast. What makes you think that?
Because it says rapid progress.
Okay, and it says that it prospers in their hands, right? Things are going well for these people. So do y'all remember on our dry erase board inside that we talked about how that word diligent appears so many times in this book of Ezra? What are some things that you had marked down, questions or things you noticed or things you really liked in this chapter 5?
I like when the people building the temple are like, well, if you don't like it, why don't you go ask the king and he'll show you that I'm right.
Okay.
That's what I would do.
Anybody else?
Actually, I'd say if you want to bet you $100, king's gonna let.
Of course, that might be a risky thing to say, mightn't it? Because the guy who's king now isn't the king who sent them. You know how the story ends, but it's a different king now. What other things did y'all mark? Tell you what, let's do this. The 3 of you talk together, and the 5 of you talk together. So, Luke, could you move over here to this bench? And I want the two groups to come up with something in this chapter that we haven't already discussed that you think, we're in chapter 5 still, that you either marked or you have a question about or you think is interesting or significant. And for the first 2 minutes, Eli can't say anything.
All right. I need a Bible.
That's a good start. That's exactly right. You do. Luke, come over here. So, hey, Lucas. Luke. I don't care. Come over here so that you can talk to Brooklyn and Kendall as well.
What chapter is it?
We're in chapter 5 of the book of Ezra.
Yeah, there's a slight advantage. I'm just saying.
Why?
So
He
wait.
doesn't even know what chapter we're in. And you think they have an advantage?
Wait, what are we trying to figure out?
I want you to tell me one thing, and this is for the people who are watching at home too. I want you to come up with one thing from chapter 5 that I haven't already mentioned that you either underlined when you were doing your reading, which I guess you didn't do,
I read.
or something you noticed, or something you have a question about, or you think is cool. As a group, I want you to come up with at least one thing. And then if you've already got that done, I want you to come up with at least one thing that would be a theme from this chapter. Remember the big ideas that we have listed on the dry erase board inside? It doesn't have to be a new one, but is there one of those that's already written on our board that you have written down on your note paper that is displayed in this chapter? Remember on this paper right here, you had a page that we filled out together. It was page 3 and it looks like this. Do y'all remember?
Yeah.
So you all wrote down what we wrote on the dry erase board. This is the big story. I want you to identify either one of these or a new one that is proven or shown in chapter 5. Do you understand what you're doing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and Eli, you can talk now.
Yeah, I know.
You look in chapter.
Do you
I've
two
been to
understand? Okay.
In verse 8,
Because there's more guys in the
But I
group,
think we're
and guys are just statistically smarter.
He said they have more boys and boys are smarter.
I said guys.
I think that's funny.
And I said statistics.
Very funny. He hasn't said a word the whole time.
He's not even there.
He just left. He left.
It's called pondering.
Yeah.
He's about to come back with something spectacular.
He has to go think about it in private.
Well, he may want to keep it to himself. Not all knowledge can be shared. Some of it's just too great for weak-minded.
I can assure you it's not coming from Levi Taylor.
Anyway,
Yeah, y'all focus on what you're doing. Sorry.
Yeah, write it down.
what do you have? If you're going to interrupt me.
in verse 8.
But he doesn't think very much. I wrote his paper to help him graduate. His paper that he had to have graduate. 4 pages. Yeah, because you can do it himself.
In verse 8, means
Kendall, are you
specially
participating?
prepared
Yeah.
stones.
No, it's not.
That's what you
He's a
got.
boy.
We talked about that. Stones and limber or something.
Stones and limber. I mean timber.
We talked about that. 2 things that they use.
I think we should, I think our point should be that God enabled them to keep working and kept them safe to keep working until the letter could get to the king and then back. And then, let's see, what was one of
Okay, 30 seconds, and then we're going to share what you've come up with.
What do you have now?
Did you really just say that, Luke?
Okay, so
I have something.
I have something too. We can just both share our something. Because she didn't say it had to be one thing specifically. You already know.
All right, this group obviously has something because I hear them talking about it. So, Luke, will you share what your group had?
Yeah.
We've got
Whenever
two
you
things.
talked about
Okay.
what they use, you didn't say that they use specially prepared stones.
Okay, and why do you think that that is significant? My translation doesn't have that. Is it in verse 8
Yeah.
that you're... Okay. Mine just says is being built with huge stones.
Mine says, it is being rebuilt with specially prepared stones.
Okay, well that's really interesting. So Luke is reading from the New Living Translation, which is another translation that I like a whole lot. The difference between these two translations, what you have on your printout is the ESV, and it's more of a technical translation, like a scholastic translation. The New Living Translation, the goal with that translation was to convey the emotion that's behind the verses. So it's not that it's not accurate, it's that they're trying to show feeling in the reading. Does that make sense? And so I really like to read that translation. So maybe what would that mean to you, Luke, that they were specially prepared stones?
But they didn't just use any stones.
Okay, it was important to them, right? This was something that they invested their lives in. This was something, it wasn't, have you ever been on a job and you get there and the person's like, listen, we need to get this done by 5 o'clock, so just throw it together. Whatever we can do is fine. Have you ever been part of a project like that?
Most of my projects are done like that.
Do what?
Because most of my projects are done like that.
Why is that?
I procrastinate.
Okay, and are those projects that mean a lot to you though?
Sometimes.
So if I was your teacher and I gave you an assignment, and when I gave the assignment you were like, wow, this is like a life-changing assignment, and I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life. Would that be the kind of assignment you would do like that?
I put more effort into it.
You put more effort into it, right? You put more thought into it. I don't necessarily think, Kendon, that being a procrastinator means that you don't put good effort into something. I usually do things at the last minute, but I know how many minutes it takes to do them. So I just wait until the end, but that doesn't mean that I do a bad job. So I don't necessarily, those two things don't necessarily go together. Do you feel like you do a bad job because you procrastinate?
Not really.
Okay.
I had another point too. In verse 5, it says, "But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease till the matter came to Darius, and then they returned answer by letter concerning this matter."
Okay, so verse 5, I'm just repeating that because people on the video, we have people watching, they may not be able to hear you. So I want them to know what you're talking about. What did you have with that verse?
I thought that it was pretty cool that God protected them and basically did not allow the people to stop them from building until there was a reply from the king.
Absolutely.
And
so the whole time that this, remember how long it was to send a message? The whole time that message is being sent, the whole time that message is coming back, what's happening, Eli?
they're still building.
The work is going on. They are moving right along. What else were you thinking about that? I think I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
I just thought that you said you wanted us to find another point, and I think that verse portrays that God is looking out for them and God endures. God's
Absolutely. How did
We had one that
what
was like
wording
that.
did we use on our dry erase?
we have one that we
Sovereign. God is sovereign, right? God is in control of not just, sometimes we tend to think, well, there are good things that happen in the world and there are bad things that happen in the world. But God is sovereign. He can exercise authority anywhere he sees fit, right? We've already talked about the fact that Cyrus wasn't a follower of Yahweh. Darius wasn't a follower of Yahweh, but God stirred Cyrus's heart, right? So he was able to work in that situation. There's also another one that we had on our themes that this goes with, besides God is sovereign? Does anybody, if you look at your list that you had on this page, does anybody see another one that you had written down that goes with that verse? I think we had it written down. Does anybody see one? Well, let's see if we can figure it out together. In verse 1, the Bible says, the very last phrase of verse 1 says, in the name of the God of Israel. What's the rest of it?
Even unto them.
Okay, somebody who's reading from the English Standard Version, what does it say there? Or another translation so we can get the grasp of what that means, Eli.
Who was over them?
Who was over them? Okay, so the God of Israel, who was over them. Then look at verse 2. And verse 2 says the part that we were just talking about, that the prophets of, the prophets of God were with them. Do y'all see that part? The prophets of God were with them. And then look down at verse 5. That's the one that Eli was just sharing. But the eye of their God was on the elders. What do those three verses show us that could be a big picture? Something that the Bible is telling us about God and God's people.
That they're always his people and that he always takes care of them.
And he's with them, right? Isn't that one that we wrote down? Y'all check your list. Did we write that? Like something like God's people are not alone, or God is always with them? Did we write that down?
That was actually what I was trying to say the first time.
Okay.
I didn't know whatever y'all said, that whatever word y'all used mean. I thought you were talking about the same
We
thing.
wrote dwelling among us.
Dwelling among us. Okay, so that would be the same thing. All three of those, I think, are really important. You've got two prophets of God here. They're encouraging and supporting these people. Verse 1 tells us that God was over them. And then verse 5 tells us that the eye of their God was on them. You know, when I think about what Ezra means for us today, I think that people today have less of a concept of this than people did in Bible times. The fact that God does see us, that God is with us, because we are a very educated people, right? We're a very technological people. We've figured out all of the mysteries of the universe. We know how the human body works. We know how stars are formed. In the day that this was written, people saw those things and they didn't understand them. And so what did they say it was? God. God was doing that, right? And today, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. You know I'm a science nerd. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to understand things. I'm just saying that because we think we understand so much, we've almost turned off our mind's eye to realize that God is still with us. God is still the provider of the stars being created, even if you understand how the molecules come together, right? It doesn't make you less miraculous, less of a miracle because you understand how your blood works. It should make you realize that you're more of a miracle because you understand how your blood works. So I think the fact that we know that we are not alone is a really big, important thing out of this chapter. Okay, was there anything else that this group had to share? That was great. Thank you. What about this group?
We underlined in verse 11 the part where it says we are the servants of the God of heaven and earth. And we were thinking that it could be on this sheet, part of our people of God are servants.
Okay, awesome. I love that. And I hadn't picked up on that at all. So this group said that in verse 11, the people of God are servants. That verse also proves one that I know we wrote down for Yahweh is. And what is it? God of heaven and earth. And do you remember that when we talked about this, right there where that is written, that's the Israelites talking, right? And remember that I told you that that's a specific way that the Israelites referred to God. Like, there's lots of people who use the word God. But this was a very specific way that the servants of Yahweh said, we are the God of heaven and earth. That was like giving him a proper name instead of a little g God. Does that make sense to y'all? So we had that on our list. Awesome. Do y'all have anything else?
Oh, we had a theme.
Okay.
It was pretty much saying like how diligent God's people works and how we're called to be diligent. It's not just something that's like.
We're called to be diligent. What does being diligent mean?
Staying at it.
Staying at it. Do any of you struggle with that? I do.
Yeah.
I struggle with being diligent.
Like, in everything? Or...
Yeah, in everything.
I didn't know if we were talking about something.
I really like to start things. Like, I love to start things. Is there anybody else here who has that personality? But being diligent every day, to show up every day and do the little things that keep things going, right? To keep stacking up rocks and stacking up rocks and stacking up rocks. Some of you have personalities that love to stack up rocks. Me, on the third day that I was there stacking up rocks, I would have been like, I think I need to go see what color we need to paint the nursery in the new temple. Yeah, I would have been, not because I'm lazy, I'm a hard worker, but I don't want to be diligent. And yeah, I think this is saying to us that God's people are called to be diligent. Why do you think that might be true? Is it because God wants his people to be good wall builders?
I think it's because you have to be diligent in your mission to bring others to salvation and spread the light.
Absolutely. And I think to grow as a Christian, you've got to be diligent, don't you? All of you, we've had lessons about this. Every person sitting here, I guarantee you, has decided at the new year that they were going to read their Bible every day, right? Okay. Read their Bible more. Read their Bible regularly. And it's a good idea. But in order to get the benefit from it, what do we have to be?
Diligent.
Diligent. In order to be a prayer warrior, what do we have to be in our prayer? Diligent, right? We don't get the results that we seek from our Christian life by reading our Bible at Christmas and Easter. We don't get the presence of God in our prayer life by praying at Christmas and Easter. They have to be things that we do diligently. So I think it is an important characteristic for us. All right, anybody have anything else on chapter 5? If not, we're going to move on to chapter 6. Then Darius the king made a decree, and search was made in Babylonia in the house of the archives where the documents were stored. And in Ecbatana, the citadel that is in the province of Media, a scroll was found on which this was written, a record. In the first year of Cyrus the king issued a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be rebuilt, the place where sacrifices were offered, and let its foundations be retained. Its height shall be 60 cubits, and its breadth 60 cubits, with 3 layers of great stones and 1 layer of timber. Let the cost be paid from the royal treasury. And also let the gold and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that is in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, be restored and brought back to the temple that is in Jerusalem, each to its place. You shall put them in the house of God. Now therefore, Tetane, governor of the province beyond the river, Shethar-Bozone, and your associates, the governors, who are in the province beyond the river, keep away. Let the work on this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild this house of God on its site. Moreover, I make a decree regarding what you shall do for these elders of the Jews for the rebuilding of this house of God. The cost is to be paid to these men in full and without delay from the royal revenue, the tribute of the province from beyond the river. And whatever is needed, bulls, rams, or sheep for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, or oil, as the priests at Jerusalem require, let that be given to them day by day without fail, that they may offer pleasing sacrifices to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. Also, I make a decree that if anyone alters this edict, a beam shall be pulled out of his house. He shall be impaled on it, and his house shall be made a dunghill. May the God who has caused his name to dwell there overthrow any king or people who shall put out a hand to alter this or to destroy this house of God that is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, make a decree. Let it be done with all diligence. Okay, let's stop there and talk for just a minute. So, a search is made, right? And interestingly, this place, Ecbatana, was like the summer house of the Persian kings. And so what they say in the history books that I'm reading is that King Cyrus probably spent the first part of his reign as king at this place, Ecbatana, because it was their summer retreat. And so that's where they found the scroll that had this written on it. And do the Israelites, do they get good news or do they get bad news?
Good news.
They get good news. They get the best news they could have gotten, right? Because not only does the news come back that, yes, they're allowed to do this, but the specific things that they were doing were in the decree. The fact that they were supposed to use huge stones, the fact that they were supposed to have these giant timbers brought across the sea, those were all in there. What else was in there? That was even better.
Them saying that the king's treasury was going to pay for everything.
The king's treasury is going to pay for all of this, because what Darius finds when he looks at the decree is, why were they going here?
For the king.
For the king. King Cyrus, remember, sent them and said, I want you to build a temple and I want you to pray for me. So King Darius says not only are they allowed to do the work, but we're supposed to be paying for all of it. And that's not all. He says something else. He adds to the decree. What does he add?
He says we're not just going to pay for supplies, but we're going to give them like bulls and stuff too to sacrifice. And then he also says if anyone tries to alter it or like mess with their work, that a beam's going to be taken out of their house and they're going to get stabbed with it, and then they're going to turn their house into a dung pile.
Right. So not only the royal treasury is going to pay to build the temple, but now other people are going to give them everything they need for their sacrifices, for their supplies in the temple. And who were those other people that were going to give all that stuff to them?
The people that were trying to stop them.
The people who were trying to stop them. This is interesting to me because you can see how there would start to be some conflict and some hatred there, can't you? Because these people have now been decreed that they're basically going to be taxed, and that their taxes are going to go straight to these Israelites. And if you remember from a little while ago, I would have to look back to see which chapter it was. But there's one of the groups of people that live in this area that we hear a lot about in the New Testament. Does anybody remember who they were? I'm not sure if I can find it or not. Some of these people are Samaritans. And I'm sure you can think of stories in the New Testament. Think of Jesus when he stops at the well and he speaks to a woman who's from Samaria. There's a long history in the New Testament of hatred between the Samaritans and the Jews. And you can kind of see here maybe how some of that hatred got started, right? So the great timbers had been ordered. It's going to be paid for by the royal treasury. It's a royal project. This is really the most favorable answer that they could have gotten. in verses 11 and 12, where they talk about anybody who goes against the decree, a beam is pulled out of his house, there's a lot of different interpretations of those verses. You may have a translation that says something different, but the gist of it is all of them are bad, very bad. Okay, something really bad is going to happen to you. And the other part that was important, and honestly, I'm not sure that I really understood the cultural significance of it from the commentary that I was reading. But one thing that they pointed out was that because the person's house was named as what would be used to do harm to them, that was really significant. You know, it was a great shame for your own home to be used as a source of your demise. Does that make sense? And what the interpretations say is that the specific thing that was done, like your house is turned into a dunghill or you get impaled, that part isn't really important. What's significant is the person who goes against this is going to be destroyed by their own home. Okay? Anybody have any other comments on those verses? We see diligence in here a lot in what we've read already. We've got diligence mentioned in chapter 5, verse 8. We've got diligence mentioned in chapter 6, verse 12, and chapter 6, verse 13. Let's keep going and see what happens next. We're in verse 13. Then, according to the word sent by Darius the king, Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, Shethar-Bozenai, and their associates did with all diligence what Darius the king had ordered. And the elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. They finished their building by decree of the God of Israel and by decree of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. And the people of Israel, the priests and the Levites and the rest of the returned exiles celebrated the dedication of this house of God with joy. They offered at the dedication of this house of God 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, according to the number of the tribes of Israel. And they set the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their divisions for the service of God at Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. Okay, so what we see here is that they continue on and they finish their job. And verse 14 is really significant because verse 14 says they finished their building by decree of who? The God of Israel. So the first person who made a decree was the God of Israel. We don't actually have a decree from God listed in this chapter, do we? But what did God do?
He moved stirred up the heart of King Cyrus and Darius and the people who returned. God is the stirrer, right? He's the one who's making all of this happen. And then they list the kings by decree of Cyrus, who's the one who originally sent them. And Darius, he's the one who said, hey, not only do they have the right to do this, but we're going to pay for all of it. And then Artaxerxes, now the writer of Ezra, remember this is written after everything happens, he's looking ahead. Because Artaxerxes is who the king is going to be under when we have Nehemiah ruling and they're rebuilding the wall. Okay? So he's saying all of these kings had a part in accomplishing the purposes of God. And that's really important to our big theme that God is sovereign. I like verse 15 a lot. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. I think that's very cool because the month of Adar, we've talked about the Jewish calendar some already. The month of Adar is March, and it's the last month of the Jewish year. And why is that important? What comes next? The first one.
The first month. And what are they going to do in the first month, remember? You You all know?
The calendar so the dates are right.
No. What do they celebrate in the first month of the year?
Passover.
Passover. And do you remember how we said how cool it is that all of this building, the Passover is always like, the Passover is the significant milestone that keeps coming up. And I don't think we can appreciate that fully, but you know how you think about Christmas? And you know how Christmas is kind of like the thing that you hang the rest of the year around? I mean, is there any other date that you say, well, there's only 245 days till Christmas, right?
Birthday.
Well, maybe your birthday, but the birthday is only for you,
Yeah, well, kind
right?
Yes,
I mean, my birthday isn't the same as your birthday. But don't we really hang a lot on Christmas? Christmas is a really significant event in the year, right? Well, Passover is significant not only in the Israelites' year, it's significant in their whole life. It identifies who they are. Because the greatest story of the Israelites is the Exodus from Egypt. It's being freed from slavery. And what we see is throughout the Old Testament, we see that picture over and over and over and over again. And everything is tied to Passover. What we are reading about right here is a tiny Exodus. They were slaves of the Babylonians. They got exiled. We know they're not really free, but do you see it's a tiny picture of what had happened to the Israelites in Egypt. We see this multiple times. And then when we get all the way to the New Testament and we meet Jesus Christ, when does he get crucified? At Passover. Remember, they're celebrating Passover. That's he and his disciples have the Passover meal in the upper room. That's where we get our communion from. They are celebrating Passover, and then he's crucified. That's an exodus. We are in slavery, and God is saying to us, I'm going to set you free. And the way I'm going to set you free is not by moving you to another land. I'm not going to give you a promised land like I did in the Old Testament. I'm going to give you a promised one. And Jesus is the promised one. So the story of the Exodus, the story of Moses leading people out of Egypt through the desert and bringing them to the promised land, that is the story that identifies all of God's people. It identified the Israelites in the Old Testament, and even though maybe we don't realize it clearly, it identifies us as well. So I think it's super cool that if you look at verse 19, which we're getting ready to read, Kendon, read verse 19 for us. What does it say?
On the 14th day of the first month, the returned exiles kept the Passover.
Awesome. So do you see how perfect that is? They've been working on this temple, and how long have they been working on it? It's not like a one-year project that they finished and they're like, oh yeah, we got it done in time for Passover. How many years did we say it took them? With the stops and the starts and all that.
17.
It's 17 when we started this chapter. It's 20 when they finish. So 20 years, and they finish right on time, and the very first thing they get to do is celebrate the Passover, which is what they did right before they started it, right? So that's just so cool. That's very, very cool. Did anybody have anything that you noticed in those verses that we've read so far? I noticed that in verse 17 is when they dedicate the temple. And a couple of things that I noticed there. First, in verse 16, it says they celebrated the dedication of this house of God with joy. Dedicating their temple, having their temple was a source of joy for them. You know, I think we got a small picture of that this past year. Were your parents really, really happy the first Sunday that they got to come back inside and worship inside the church? That really meant a lot to a lot of people. And probably none of your parents are old, but it probably meant the most to the oldest people in our church. It was very, very significant for them. It filled them with joy. Other things, and this is 20 years. So they started in 536 and they finish in 516. And it's been 70 years since the first Israelites were taken captive by the Babylonians. And do y'all remember that was a prophecy? And we find it in the book of, anybody got a guess or no? We've said it in this study. Where do we find that prophecy?
Nehemiah.
No.
Haggai.
No.
Zechariah.
No. Starts with a J.
Job.
No. Not a book of prophecy. Jeremiah, right. In Jeremiah, he prophesies that it's going to be 70 years that the people of Israel are going to be in exile from the Babylonians, and that's how long it takes from the beginning of the destruction till the temple is dedicated here. What about verse 17? What do you notice in that list of things that they sacrificed? Anybody notice anything significant that we have actually talked about?
Male goats for each tribe.
12 goats, one for each tribe. And why is that significant, Luke? Because remember, we said even though there's only 3 tribes who came back, they represent all of God's people, right? So that's significant. They offer a sin offering for all of Israel. They're following the law of Moses. I think that's all I had. Did anybody have anything else that you marked in those verses? We're going to read the last group of verses here. Okay, let's look at verse 19. On the 14th day of the first month, the returned exiles kept the Passover. For the priests and the Levites had purified themselves together. All of them were clean. So they slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the returned exiles, for their fellow priests, and for themselves. It was eaten by the people of Israel who had returned from exile, and also by everyone who had joined them and separated himself from the uncleanness of the peoples of the land to worship the Lord, the God of Israel. And they kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy, for the Lord had made them joyful and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria to them, so that he aided them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. All right, who has something that they noticed in those verses?
I thought it was really cool that they, in the end, let anyone who would come and separate themselves from the uncleanness around them, they would let them come and join in, because I thought it was weird that they didn't let people help build them, but they still gave them the chance to come in if they were to leave out their uncleanness and come to the Passover.
Absolutely, and this is really it's a really important verse for us to notice. And it's an important verse, again, for us to carry into the New Testament. Because at the beginning, what did they have to prove? To be one of these people who worked on the temple, who came back.
Direct descendants of the Israelites.
Right. They had to be able to prove who they were by their genetic material. But what this verse is telling us is that it's not enough who you are. It's also who you are. Do y'all know what I'm saying? Being a follower of the one true God isn't about what your blood says. It's about what your heart says. And that's what we see demonstrated in these verses. And we're going to see this carry forward into the New Testament, because the people who oppose Jesus the strongest are the people who think the only thing that matters is who my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was. And it doesn't matter if I do the things that God has called me to do. It only matters what my last name is, right? And here they're showing us that even though they entered into this as we have to be a pure group of people and we have to be the people that God chose, we also have to be a people who obeys. And any person who obeys and who follows our God becomes... The bugs are like eating me alive out here. Are they eating y'all?
No.
I've got like 47 mosquitoes on me and something just landed in my head.
It was a fly. It flew off.
What they're saying is anybody who does that becomes our blood. So it's like you become adopted, right? I'm a follower of Christ, so I am a descendant of Abraham. I've been adopted into his family. Does that make sense to y'all? Okay, before the bugs eat us alive, we are going to do the last step, which is important. I know some of you will not have this handout with you still. But if you have this handout where I'm teaching you the Bible study method, right? We just finished number 6 for this section. For the section of Scripture that was chapters 1 through 6, we finished all the way through number 6. Somebody tell me what number 7 says.
Respond and transform.
Respond and transform. And what are the ideas under respond and transform? Look at myself. Then I might decide to journal. I might decide to pray. I might decide to create art. I might decide to create music. This is a very personal part of Bible study. If you skip this part of Bible study, then you have had what I had in college. When I was in college, I had to have a, I can't even remember what they called them now, like a social science elective. And so I decided I would take the Old Testament because I thought, I've gone to church for a lot of years and that'll be an easy grade. And so I walked into the Old Testament class and I sat down, and a man who looked very Jewish, and I was excited, came out. He had a really nice formal beard and he was very conservatively dressed. And he said, the Old Testament is a history book and we will study it as a history book. And you will be able to spell every place and every name in the chapters that we study. And it doesn't mean anything except exactly what it says as a history book. And I was like, you know, a balloon. I was the little clown animal that the clown makes, and then the mom comes up and pokes a fork, a steak knife through it. I just fizzled, right? If you don't do this step, that's what you will have done. You will have had a really nice history lesson. But the point of looking at not just the details, but this page, what's the big story, and thinking about that is, what is God saying to you personally through this part of the Bible? Does that make sense to y'all? So I want you to think. I want you to look at your notes that you've taken. I want you to think about what you've heard in the book of Ezra in these first 6 chapters. And I want you to ask yourself right now, when I finish talking, and I am going to stop, I want you to ask yourself, what is God saying to me? And then I want you to choose a way that you are actually going to respond. So it might be that you write. It might be that you create some art. When I say art, I just mean using materials. I don't mean it has to be beautiful. You might choose to some music that goes with this. You might write a prayer. You might sit there and pray. Okay? And in just a minute, I'm going to ask you how you're going to do this. So I actually expect you to do it. Okay? So let's take 5 minutes. And then we'll share for 1 minute. And we'll be done at 8:10. Okay? Go.